The grand hall of the Davies mansion gleamed under the glow of golden chandeliers. Laughter and chatter filled the air as Nigeria's elite sipped expensive champagne, eagerly awaiting the wedding of the year. Billionaire Chijioke Davies, dressed in a crisp white agbada, stood near the altar, checking his wristwatch for the third time in 5 minutes. He exhaled sharply. "Where is Pearl?" His best man, Daniel, walked up to him, clearing her throat. "Relax, Chijioke. Brides take their time. It's tradition." Chijioke wasn't convinced. He turned to his personal assistant, Mercy, who had been coordinating the event. "Have you seen Pearl?" Mercy hesitated, glancing nervously. "She was in her suite about an hour ago." Chijioke's mother, Madame Veronica Davies, approached with a tight smile. She wore an elegant gold lace gown, her signature pearls gleaming under the lights. "The guests are waiting, son. What's the delay?" Before Chijioke could answer, one of Pearl's bridesmaids, Abigail, rushed into the hall, breathless and pale. She grabbed Abigail's arm and whispered something urgently into her ear. Her face turned white. Daniel slowly looked at Chijioke, hesitation in her eyes. "Chijioke, we have a problem." Chijioke's patience snapped. "Say it." Daniel exhaled. "Pearl is gone. She left a note." "She?" Chijioke's voice was dangerously calm. "Gone where?" Daniel handed him a crumpled note. Chijioke's fingers shook as he unfolded it. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. Please don't look for me." Chijioke's pulse roared in his ears. "She ran away." Daniel's face was grim. "She left the country, took a private jet hours ago." Chijioke clenched his jaw so tightly it ached. Humiliation, fury, disbelief, all of it crashed over him at once. The biggest wedding of the year had turned into a scandal. The media would have a field day. His investors, his family, his reputation, everything was on the line. His hands balled into fists. He needed a solution. Fast. A movement in the corner caught his eye. A young woman stood near the entrance, wide-eyed and unsure, her hands nervously gripping a tray. It was Mercy, one of the hotel staff. She was polite, quiet, and unremarkable. He barely noticed her before, but right now, she was his only way out. A reckless idea struck him. Insane, impossible, but necessary. Chijioke strode toward her, his heartbeat hammering. "Mercy," he said, his voice low but firm. "Marry me. Right now." Her tray slipped from her hands. "Sir," she stammered, eyes wide in shock. "You heard me," Chijioke said, eyes locked on hers. "Put on the dress. You're my bride now." Mercy's hands trembled as she stared up at Chijioke, unable to believe what she just heard. "Sir, marry you," she stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. "This has to be a joke." Chijioke's dark eyes locked onto hers, unreadable, intense. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Mercy took a step back, shaking her head. "I'm just a maid. I serve drinks. I can't just become your wife." Chijioke inhaled sharply, his frustration evident. "Listen, I don't have time to explain. My bride ran away. If I don't marry someone today, the media will destroy me. My company will suffer. My reputation." He paused, rubbing his temples. "I just need a bride for the public." Mercy's eyes darted to the massive hall, where hundreds of guests whispered among themselves. The murmurs grew louder. People were staring. The scandal was already unfolding. "I'm sorry, but no," Mercy said firmly, shaking her head. "I can't do this." Chijioke clenched his jaw. He had no time for arguments. His mind worked fast, calculating his next move. Then, he said the words that changed everything. "I'll give you 30 million naira." Silence. Mercy's breath hitched. "What?" 30 million, Chijioke repeated, his voice calm, steady. "Tax-free. All yours. If you marry me today." Mercy's heart raced. That was more money than she could ever imagine. More than enough to change her life, to escape poverty, to finally build the future she dreamed of. "But, marry you?" She looked up at him, searching his face. He was powerful, dangerous, and clearly desperate. She swallowed hard. There have to be conditions. Chijioke nodded. Of course. This is a contract marriage. Nothing more. We stay married for 6 months. You play the role of my wife in public. No romantic expectations. After that, we divorce and you keep the money. Mercy exhaled shakily. And after 6 months, you walk away rich and free. Her mind spun. The offer was insane. Unbelievable. But could she really say no? She lifted her eyes to Chijioke's, her pulse hammering. Fine, she whispered. I'll do it. Mercy's hands trembled as she followed Chijioke down the hall, her heart racing. She had just agreed to marry a billionaire she barely knew. For money. This was madness. Chijioke walked ahead with powerful strides, his phone pressed to his ear. Mercy, find address. Now. Mercy's voice crackled through the speaker. Sir, what? No questions. Just do it. As they reached the bridal suite, Chijioke turned to Mercy, his expression unreadable. You have 10 minutes to get ready. Mercy swallowed hard. This is happening too fast. Chijioke's gaze darkened. It has to. The press is already sniffing around. If you back out now, I lose everything. Mercy folded her arms. I agreed to marry you. But I won't be bullied. Chijioke exhaled sharply. Fine. What do you need? Assurances. She squared her shoulders. I need the contract in writing. I won't go through with this unless I see proof that I'll get my money and be free after 6 months. Chijioke's lips twitched, almost in amusement. You're bold. I have to be, Mercy shot back. I may be a maid, but I'm not stupid. For a moment, Chijioke just looked at her. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed his lawyer. Alu, draft a contract. 6 months of marriage. 30 million naira in her account upon divorce. Make it airtight. Mercy's stomach flipped. This was real. Minutes later, the assistant arrived with a stunning white gown. Mercy hesitated before stepping into the changing room, her reflection in the mirror almost unrecognizable. A maid. About to marry a billionaire. She took a deep breath and stepped out. Chijioke's gaze flickered over her. His expression was unreadable. But for a second, just a second, something softened in his eyes. Then he offered his arm. Let's go. As they walked into the ballroom, whispers erupted. Who is she? Where's Pearl? What's going on? Chijioke ignored them all, leading Mercy straight to the altar. The priest hesitated. Mr. Davies, this is Hale. Chijioke's voice was firm. Start the ceremony. Mercy's pulse hammered. What had she just done? The room was heavy with tension as the priest hesitated, glancing between Chijioke and Mercy. The guests murmured in confusion, some already pulling out their phones to record the unfolding scandal. Mercy's throat was dry. This was really happening. Shall we begin? The priest finally asked, his voice uncertain. Chijioke's grip on Mercy's hand tightened slightly. Yes. The priest cleared his throat and opened his book. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Mercy barely heard the words. Her mind swam with doubt. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She stole a glance at Chijioke, whose face remained stoic, unreadable. How could he be so calm? His bride had abandoned him, and now he was marrying a complete stranger. When the priest reached the vows, Chijioke turned to her, his dark eyes locked onto hers, firm and unwavering. I, Chijioke Davies, take you, Mercy Okafor, to be my lawfully wedded wife. His voice was smooth, controlled. To have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. Until we no longer need to pretend. A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd. Mercy stiffened. He had thrown in that last part just to remind her this was a contract, nothing more. The priest hesitated but continued. Do you, Mercy Okafor, take Chijioke Davies as your lawfully wedded husband? Mercy felt every gaze in the room pinned on her. This was her last chance to back out. She inhaled deeply. 30 million naira, a fresh start. 6 months. I do, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the priest said, still seeming confused. You may kiss the bride. A fresh wave of murmurs surged through the guests. Mercy's breath caught. Kiss? That wasn't in the contract. She looked at Chijioke in alarm, but before she could protest, he leaned in. His lips barely brushed against hers, just a whisper of contact, but it sent a jolt through her body. The room erupted into applause, some polite, some scandalized, and others outright shocked. Chijioke pulled away just as quickly, his face expressionless. It's done. Madame Veronica forced a smile and clapped stiffly, but Mercy could see the storm brewing in the older woman's eyes. This was far from over. The tension in the room lingered as Chijioke Davies took Mercy Okafor's hand and led her down the aisle. The murmurs of the guests followed them, many still unsure what to make of the unfolding scandal. As they reached the end of the aisle, Chijioke's grip on Mercy's hand tightened, signaling that it was time to leave. What now? Mercy whispered, looking up at him, her voice shaky. Chijioke didn't answer immediately, his gaze distant as he surveyed the room. His mind was spinning with the consequences of the mess Pearl had left behind. He finally turned to Mercy, his expression unreadable. Now, Mrs. Davies, he said, his voice clipped, we go home. The ride to Chijioke's estate was silent. Mercy sat stiffly in the back seat of the sleek black Rolls-Royce, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her mind a storm of emotions. She had just married one of the wealthiest men in Nigeria, but it felt surreal. Her life as a hotel maid, scrubbing floors and making beds, felt like a distant memory now. She glanced at Chijioke beside her. He was scrolling through his phone, completely unfazed, as if they hadn't just exchanged vows in front of hundreds of people. His calm demeanor only added to her confusion. How could he be so detached? When they arrived at Chijioke's mansion, the grand estate gleamed under the soft moonlight. Mercy's breath caught in her throat as she gazed up at the towering structure. It looked more like a palace than a home, with gold trim, marble floors, and windows that reached for the sky. Madame Veronica, Chijioke's mother, stood by the entrance, arms crossed, her gaze cold as she watched Mercy approach. Welcome to your new home, Chijioke said, his voice terse as he opened the car door for her. Mercy followed him, her feet heavy as she stepped inside the mansion. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken tension. The moment Mercy stepped inside, Madame Veronica's sharp eyes swept over her. I don't care what happened today, she said, her voice cold and commanding. You will never be my son's real wife. Mercy swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves, but before she could respond, Chijioke stepped between them. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke. Mother, we just got married. I'd appreciate it if you didn't cause a scene. Madame Veronica scoffed, her eyes flashing with disdain. A scene? You think this is a scene? Wait until the media gets their hands on this disgrace, she sneered, turning to Mercy with contempt in her gaze. Enjoy your 6 months while they last. With that, Madame Veronica stormed off, leaving an oppressive silence in her wake. Mercy clenched her fists, fighting the sting of anger rising within her. She had expected hostility, but not this early. Chijioke glanced at her, but said nothing as he led her upstairs. The weight of the situation was starting to settle in. They stopped in front of the master bedroom, and Mercy froze. Wait, this is your room, she asked, her voice tight with unease. Chijioke opened the door and stepped inside, turning to face her. It's our room now, he said matter-of-factly. Mercy hesitated, standing still in the doorway. I thought we'd have separate rooms, she said quietly, her eyes flicking to the king-sized bed that seemed far too intimate for someone she barely knew. Chijioke met her gaze, his expression unreadable. The press will be watching, he said, his voice soft yet insistent. The staff will talk. If we sleep in different rooms, the world will know this is fake. Mercy's stomach twisted as she processed his words. So, we're supposed to pretend all the time? She asked, her voice betraying her frustration. Chijioke exhaled, stepping closer. That was the deal, he said, his voice now soft with something that resembled understanding. You knew what you were signing up for. Mercy folded her arms across her chest, still standing at the threshold. I agreed to marry you. But I won't be bullied, she said firmly. Chijioke looked at her for a moment, as if considering her words. Fine, he said with a nod. What do you need? Mercy's eyes flashed with determination. I need the contract in writing, she said. I won't go through with this unless I see proof that I'll get my money and be free after 6 months. Chijioke raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching with a hint of amusement. You're bold, he said quietly. I have to be, Mercy replied, lifting her chin. I may be a maid, but I'm not stupid. The moment was interrupted when there was a soft knock at the door. Chijioke turned, his expression hardening. I'll take care of this. Stay here. Mercy watched as he walked toward the door, his stride purposeful. The last thing she wanted was to be left alone with her thoughts. Her eyes moved to the massive bed in the middle of the room. This wasn't real, it couldn't be. She had been a maid in a hotel just hours ago, and now she was in the master bedroom of one of the wealthiest men in the country. Minutes passed, and Chijioke returned, his expression as unreadable as ever. I've had the contract drafted, he said, handing her a thick envelope. Take it. Read it. We'll proceed tomorrow. Mercy's heart raced as she took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. This was her future. She could walk away rich, free, and with a new life, or she could find herself trapped in a web of lies and deceit. Chijioke's voice broke through her thoughts. Don't take too long, he said, his tone colder than before. Time is money. As Mercy sat on the edge of the bed, reading the contract, the weight of it all began to settle over her. She had done this for the money, for the promise of a better life. But would it be worth it? The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Mercy felt the tension in the air, and as she glanced up, she saw Chijioke standing at the window, looking out at the vast estate. She wasn't sure if he was waiting for her approval or if he was simply biding his time. But one thing was clear, this was only the beginning. The night dragged on, and Mercy's mind remained tangled with questions. Could she really trust Chijioke? Could she endure 6 months of this charade, knowing that at the end of it, she would be free? Or was she walking into a deeper trap than she could ever imagine? The next chapter of her life was unfolding before her, and the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. The silence in the room stretched on, and Mercy continued to stare at the contract, her mind racing. Her pulse quickened as she read through the legal terms. 30 million naira upon the divorce. 6 months of pretending to be Chijioke's wife, with no romantic attachments, no personal connection beyond the facade they would create for the world to see. She could practically feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. The clock ticked on, each second drawing her closer to the point of no return. She set the contract down on the bed and stood up, walking to the window. The view outside was breathtaking, golden lights twinkling from the mansion's massive garden, the full moon casting an eerie glow over the perfectly manicured lawns. This was luxury, the life she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. Yet, it felt hollow, empty. She wasn't sure whether she was here out of desperation or hope. Chijioke's voice broke through her thoughts. You made your decision, Mercy. She turned to find him standing at the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. He was dressed in a simple white shirt and black trousers, his posture relaxed but alert. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her heart race, and she couldn't help but wonder if he, too, was questioning the path they had just chosen. Yes, she replied, her voice steady, though her insides churned with uncertainty. I've made my decision. Chijioke stepped forward, his presence filling the room. His gaze softened, just for a moment, before returning to its usual steely coldness. You're sure about this? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Once you sign that, there's no going back. Mercy met his eyes, her resolve firming. I'm not afraid to make a choice, she said quietly. But I need to know you'll keep your part of the deal. I need guarantees. Chijioke gave a small nod. You'll get your money when the contract is fulfilled. No tricks, no surprises. I give you my word. Mercy held his gaze, her mind still clouded with doubt, but she knew this was her only chance. This was her way out of the life she had been trapped in, and she had to take it. She picked up the pen beside the contract and held it in her hand for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision that rested on the tip of the ink. Finally, she signed. As soon as the pen touched the paper, a sense of finality filled the room. Chijioke's expression remained impassive, though his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. He gave a brief nod of approval and stepped toward the door. "I'll have everything arranged tomorrow," he said, his voice brisk. Mercy didn't respond as he left the room, her mind still reeling. She could still hear the sound of the pen scratching across the paper echoing in her ears. The decision had been made. There was no going back now. The next morning, Mercy awoke early. The sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains, bathing the room in soft golden light. She sat up in bed, feeling the silk sheets against her skin. The reality of her new life was still settling in. She was in a mansion, married to a billionaire, no, married to a man she barely knew, who had only married her for a temporary arrangement. As she moved to the window, she caught sight of the massive gardens sprawling outside, but the beauty did nothing to ease the unease in her chest. She had no idea what was waiting for her next. A knock at the door startled her, and before she could answer, it swung open. It was Chijioke again. This time, he wasn't dressed in the usual formal attire but in a simple blue polo and khaki trousers. "Morning," he said, stepping into the room without waiting for a response. He looked different, relaxed, casual, but still, there was something sharp in his demeanor. "I thought we'd go over some details for today," he added, his tone businesslike. "There are appearances to make, interviews with the press. Your role in all of this starts now. We have to make it look convincing." Mercy stood silently for a moment, processing his words. She nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. Chijioke gave her a brief nod before turning toward the door. "I'll have breakfast sent up. We'll go over everything then." Over the next few hours, things happened in a blur. A stylist arrived to help Mercy get ready, dressing her in an expensive outfit, a tailored dress, designed to make her look the part of a sophisticated wife. The media was waiting. As she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the way she had ever imagined. This wasn't the image of herself she had dreamed of, it was a new identity. An identity for a woman who was playing a role. Mercy Okafor, the maid, had been replaced by Mercy Davies, the wife of a billionaire. She wasn't sure if she liked the woman she was becoming. The day passed in a whirlwind of flashing cameras, questions, and expectations. Chijioke was every bit the polished billionaire. He played the part of the loving husband, at least in public, but Mercy could feel the distance between them. There was no warmth in his gaze, no genuine connection. He was simply doing what needed to be done, and so was she. As they posed for pictures, smiled for the cameras, and waved to the curious crowd, Mercy's heart ached with the knowledge that this was just a performance. The world was watching them, but neither of them was truly present. It was all just for show. That evening, after the cameras had stopped flashing, Chijioke and Mercy found themselves alone again. The mansion was quiet, save for the soft hum of the city in the distance. Mercy sat on the edge of the couch, her thoughts racing. Chijioke entered the room, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked at her, his eyes softening for a moment before he spoke. "You did well today," he said, his voice lacking the usual coldness. It was almost kind. Mercy didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure what to say to him anymore. What had she gotten herself into? "I didn't want any of this," she said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice trembled with a mixture of frustration and confusion. "But I had no choice." Chijioke sat beside her, his posture relaxed. "I didn't want this either," he admitted, his voice quiet. "But I need to see this through. You're in this with me now. We'll get through it together." Mercy looked at him, searching his face for sincerity. For a moment, she wondered if there was more to him than the business facade. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, the softness was gone, replaced by the cold distance she had come to expect. "You can't hide behind this mask forever, Chijioke," she whispered, almost to herself. He turned to her, his eyes sharp. "Neither can you." The days that followed were a blur of press conferences, dinners, and parties. Their fake marriage was becoming a well-oiled machine. But with every passing day, Mercy felt the weight of the contract press down on her. She had signed away her life for money, and while she tried to convince herself it was worth it, She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something would give way sooner or later. Chijioke and Mercy were stuck in a dance they couldn't get out of. Pretend for 6 months, and then walk away richer, but was that all they could be to each other? As the weeks passed, Mercy grew accustomed to her new life, and the facade they maintained in public became more seamless. Chijioke, despite his stoic and detached demeanor, began to show glimpses of something else, vulnerability that he had buried beneath his wealth and power. Mercy, too, began to see the person behind the billionaire mask, a man who had been scarred by loss, a man who had to hide his heart behind walls built from expectations and duty. They had their moments. Quiet conversations at night when the world had fallen asleep, when the cameras weren't on them. Chijioke would speak about his father, his past, his dreams that were crushed under the weight of legacy and responsibility. Mercy would listen, her heart growing heavier with empathy. She began to see him, not as a rich businessman, but as a man who had been shaped by the world's demands, and perhaps, someone who had long since stopped believing in the possibility of love. For the first time in years, Chijioke let his guard down. He shared his dreams of what could be, not for the world, but for him. As for Mercy, something had changed. Her heart, once hardened by years of struggle, began to soften. The 30 million naira she had once seen as a way out, a ticket to freedom, no longer held the same meaning. She had come to realize that her true freedom wasn't in the money, it was in choosing who she became in the face of it all. One evening, a few months before their contract was to end, Chijioke asked Mercy to meet him in the garden. It was a quiet, intimate evening, the air warm and full of the scent of jasmine from the garden. Mercy stood at the edge of the water fountain, the soft trickle of water adding to the peaceful atmosphere. Chijioke approached her, his expression serious but kind. "Mercy," he began, his voice soft, yet carrying an unexpected weight, "we made a deal, but what we've been through, it's not just a contract anymore. It's real, and I can't deny it." Mercy's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what he meant, but a part of her already knew. He took a step closer, his gaze steady. "I've fallen for you, Mercy. Not because of the contract, not because you've played the role perfectly, but because you're real. And he paused, his words faltering for a moment, "I don't want this to end. I don't want to let go of you." Mercy looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Chijioke," she whispered, unsure whether she was ready for what was about to come, but deep down, she knew she had always been ready for this moment. "You've shown me that love isn't a transaction," he continued, "it's a choice. And I choose you. I choose us." Tears filled Mercy's eyes as she stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for his. The weight of the words hung in the air, heavy with the promise of a future that no longer felt like a lie. The contract, the money, it all seemed irrelevant now. What mattered was the man standing before her, the man who had shown her what love could look like when given the chance to grow. "I choose you too," she said softly, her voice breaking as she looked up at him. A future without him felt impossible. This was real. She had never been more sure of anything in her life. The days leading up to the end of their contract were filled with a quiet understanding that something had shifted. Chijioke and Mercy were no longer strangers, no longer people bound by a piece of paper. They had built something much stronger, something rooted in honesty and shared vulnerability. On the last day of their marriage contract, as the media buzzed and the world watched them closely, Chijioke took Mercy's hand in front of the cameras once again, but this time it was different. There were no fake smiles, no pretenses. He whispered in her ear, "Let's make this real." And they did. Months later, in the same mansion where their story began, Chijioke and Mercy Davies were not just husband and wife, they were partners. They had built a life together, a life that wasn't defined by wealth or contracts, but by love, trust, and mutual respect. Mercy, who had once been a maid, now stood beside her husband, not just as his wife, but as his equal. Their story became one of transformation. Of two people who had come together for all the wrong reasons, only to find that love, true love, was something neither of them had expected. And as they stood on the balcony of their home, looking out at the life they had built, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. For the first time in a long time, they were truly free. Thanks for watching. PLS subscribe, like and share.